Hello everyone, this is Wowcrendor and I'm joined here today by Greg Street, otherwise known as Ghostcrawler. How are you doing today, Greg?
I am excellent. This baby is almost done, which makes me very happy.
I would imagine so. I know you're a busy guy, so why don't we just jump right into it? First
Deal.
question, if you could go back and change one thing about Cataclysm, what would it be?
Oh, only one thing? That's harsh.
Only one.
I think we would try to have worked the story around a continent instead of having isolated zones for the max level 80 to 85 zones. I think the way it ended up feeling was there was a lot of teleporting from place to place, which just lost some of the charm of World of Warcraft. The sense of world was eroded a little bit. As silly as it was, I think there was an awful lot of value in kind of coming over the hill and seeing into the next zone and watching the transition there. We really lost a lot of the travel, and it felt like players were just porting from place to place, which give it a very instanced feel.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That's actually one of the biggest concerns and problems I had with it.
And it was weird because it was not the kind of thing we anticipated. Like, we knew some of the things we were doing were risky or not, but that one, and maybe we're stupid, but we never sat down and said, wow, we're really hopping all over the place. I wonder if that's going to feel bad.
Yeah, because I know with the Burning Crusade, it was almost like when you went through the portal, it's like you're in this big new landscape. Or when in Wrath of the Lich King, you took the Zeppelin, it's like, wow, and now I'm in Northrend. And with this, it was just kind of like, oh, well, I'm porting here, I'm porting there.
Yeah, I think it was really important that in Northrend, it felt like your character was moving there. You were going to set up camp in Dalaran, you were going to visit all those places. It felt like progress, like you were in a brand new place. And then Cataclysm, even though we were trying to hit the nostalgia point a little bit, it really felt almost like you were going backwards. It was like, oh, I'm back to Badlands, I'm back to Hyjal. These are places I've seen before.
Yeah.
The good news is Mist has a huge new continent to explore, and I think we'll get a lot of that feeling again of, oh, this is where all the high-level bad boys go hang out in the new zone.
Mm-hmm. And even with, like you said, all the nostalgic feeling, like I've played since vanilla, and when you brought back things like ZG and Nefarian and all that, it was almost like I could go back and like remember those past experiences, and that made it more boring because I'm like, well, I've did this already.
Yeah.
So it's just I think everyone's glad to be moving forward.
Yeah.
But anyway, next question. This one's gotten quite a bit of controversy everywhere, and that's cross-realm zones versus the concept of just merging the servers. Why did you go with cross-realm zones?
So there are some servers that just have a population that's so low that it's not fun for players, and we get that. But what Cross-Realm Zones was really designed to fix is the typical zone, the typical realm, like the one I play in, has, which I'm not going to tell you, has a ton of players at max level and lots of activity in Orgrimmar and Stormwind. But then the low-level zones, I always talk about, say, Thousand Needles is dead.
Yeah.
And what Cross-Realm Zones is intended to do was to put other players there, because the experience that guys like you and me had first starting WoW was there were always other players in an area. And if you needed to group up for a little bit of time, you could do that. If there was an attack by the opposite faction, you had buddies around to help you. And the world just felt more alive and dynamic. It delivered on the promise of what a massively multiplayer game is supposed to be. So while closing realms is definitely the right solution sometimes, it doesn't help us at all to close things and open them and close things and open them. And there's not a great solution to the fact that by far the majority of characters in WoW now are max level. Mm-hmm. So there's not a great solution to make the world feel alive when they're, for new players, or alts of those characters, while still having, you don't want 20,000 players running around in Stormwind at the high-level zones, because that's not fun either.
So what about somebody that actually enjoys playing on the low population realms?
I mean, that's a really tough call, because they're basically saying, hey, I love your massively multiplayer game, but I want to play it as a single-player game, And
yeah.
We try to support lots of different play styles. We have a hugely diverse audience, and different players enjoy different things. But when you're saying, what I really like about WoW is having it all to myself, that's not really the game that we are setting out to make, or that we're really equipped to deliver a good experience on.
Yeah, and what about cross-realm auction houses? Could that happen?
it doesn't. We don't support that yet. It's something we've talked a lot about. The trick is, like, one of the beauties of the cross-realm zone feature is we can kind of turn it on and off selectively. So in a zone like Elwyn, which always tends to have some low-level characters, we don't merge as many realms together as we might those teenage zones, and particularly once you get to a place like Shadow Moon Valley or Netherstorm, which tend to just be dead of legitimately leveling characters. We can merge many realms together there. With an auction house, there's a lot of beauty in kind of learning the way your particular realm operates. Like, oh, there's no one making high-level weapons here, or, oh, the guy making glyphs is not super savvy, so I can really be the, like, big glyph guy on this realm. And if you merge too many realms together, particularly if you're doing it dynamically, you lose that. It probably is still something we'll consider for the realms that are just chronically low population, but I don't think we would take, like, a super, merging too many of the big realms together, I think, would just make the auction house a lot less fun to deal with.
Yeah. So moving on to professions, one thing I noticed with, like, newer games like Guild Wars 2, for example, is it's a pretty cool profession system where they, like, for cooking, for example, you can take an apple and, like, something like a crust you made and then mix it together and get apple pie. So, like, it's like a step forward in professions, and that made me think, would you ever improve the professions in WoW, or, like, revamp them even?
Yeah, in fact, if you look at cooking, inscription, and archaeology, particularly in Mr. Pandaria, we focused our attention on those and put a lot of effort into making those more fun and a little less grindy. I think professions don't deliver on the fantasy when you're faced with, okay, now I need to make Westfall stew, so I'll make 60 recipes of Westfall stew and then go vendor it.
Yeah.
I think cooking feels really good for Mr. Pandaria, and assuming that players like what we did, we'll take some of that and integrate it with lower level cooking, and then we will do similar things to the other professions.
Yeah. I know fishing's had a lot of changes too. So
it could use more, to be honest. I still don't think it's super fun to just sit there and fish over and over and over again. And we talk a lot about, hey, do we want to make it some kind of mini game? Do we want to make there more of a game about where you fish, and are you trying to catch certain types of fish species? The daily quest in Mists prop that up a little bit, because you get quests every day, and some of those quests can help make you a better fisherman. But I still think there's more we could do.
Yeah. And talking about changes, I know you've changed the talent system, so what led you to change the talent system, and how do you think you could even improve it further upon what you've done?
I mean, the big reason we changed it is that it never delivered on the fantasy of offering customization. We came up with a talent system. I mean, I can't take personal credit for it because it was long before my time, but as a company, the intent of the design was that rather than every combat rogue be exactly the same, you had these talents. You could customize your combat rogue to be a little different from someone else's rogue. But over time, because of the nature of the specific talents we chose and the way the tree worked, where you had to pick, at first it was 5 points and then 3 points before you could advance to another tier, but the fact that so many of them were very mathematical, this increases your DPS, players kind of solved them. And then the experience from almost everyone above a certain level of sophistication was go to your favorite website or ask your buddy or just Google, combat rogue spec. You'd pick your talents and be done and never interact with the talent system again.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to return it to something where players had to debate, agonize even a little bit about which of the talents they want to pick, make really hard decisions about which of the ones they want, and then deliver on the fact that, hey, the combat rogue in your group may have a very different talent than the ones you chose, and that'll give you guys, you'll play slightly differently, you'll have slightly different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, and I know the one thing, probably the only thing I miss about the old talent system is the fact that when you level up, like pretty much every level you gain a talent point, so it feels like you've earned something for that level.
Yeah, I think that's a legit criticism. At the end of the day, we felt like talents either had to be about customization or they had to be about progression. And we felt like the game was suffering from customization at the high end, where, like I said, a lot of players spend their time. Meanwhile, leveling up is pretty rewarding. You're getting new abilities, you're getting gear pretty quickly, you're learning things like glyphs and flying. So we already had a lot of reward mechanisms to reward leveling up, but we didn't have a lot of customization systems at the high end. So we decided the talent systems were better off as a customization feature rather than a progression feature.
All right. And moving on to raid progression, I know back in Vanilla and the Burning Crusade, the way raid progression worked was you started from the bottom, so it was either Karazhan or Molten Core, and you kind of worked your way up through the tiers. And in Wrath and Cataclysm, a lot of content that was older got skipped over. Things like Ulduar you didn't even have to do if you came back later on. So what was your goal with Pandaria to avoid having big content skipped over?
Well, the big thing we have going for us is we have Raid Finder working now, and we can introduce that at every tier. So the hope is that when, say, Mist has been out for several months, and you want your alt to gear up, rather than just skipping to the latest raid, you can run Raid Finder at the lower tier levels, and because of the matchmaking system, you'll be able to find groups to do that, and so your character is geared well enough to go into the new content.
All right, and for raid progression, are you still going with that Wrath Cataclysm model where if somebody, say, quits the game at the start and then a few raids come out and then they come back later on and it's like a tier 3 or 4 raid, can they just jump right into that raid from getting LFG gear and all that?
I wouldn't say they can jump right into it. We definitely want them to... We think that it was too extreme in Cataclysm and Lich King, where you could be geared up very, very quickly. So we want them to have to do a little bit of work to get the gear before they can hit the latest content. And we want to see, like, if a raid comes out, a guild that's running, say, normal modes might still want to go do the final bosses of the previous tier before advancing on to the new tier. We don't want to return to the extreme case of you're in Black Temple working on Illidan and your mage quits, so you go recruiting a mage and then you spend weeks running him through Karazhan and then Serpent Shrine before you can finally go to Black Temple. That sucked, and the reality was most guilds would just try to poach geared up players from each other rather than having to run someone through the old content again. So I think there's a sweet spot between not invalidating all the old content completely and not forcing players to spend weeks and weeks and weeks before they can play with their friends again.
Yeah. If there's one big change that's been made in Pandaria about raiding, what would you say that change has been?
The one big change.
Like something that just made the leap from Cataclysm to this expansion.
That is a good question. I mean, there's so many different little features that work together. I'll just rattle off a few of them. The raid in the first tier, Mist of Pandaria, has 3 separate raids, and they actually have slightly different item levels. They're not full tiers apart the way Serpent Shrine was from Karazhan, but there's still more of a sense of progression that you want to do Mogashan Vaults before you can finally advance into the Heart of Fear and then go to the Terrace. We have another feature, the Charm of Good Fortune, which is essentially a bonus roll on loot, to where if you're a completionist player with lots of extra time, you can earn an extra roll on the loot table if you keep getting screwed over and over to that item that you really want to drop, you have an extra chance to try to get loot off of that boss. I think that's a pretty big deal. We have a couple of encounters that kind of harken back to one of the things players really liked about Ulduar, which is if we do the boss in this kind of unusual and more challenging way, we have a shot at getting even better loot. So we're experimenting a little bit with that.
All right. And one thing I have to ask you about that's been pretty controversial today is the Theramore event, which it's gotten a lot of mixed reviews, and I just wanted to hear your take on the Theramore event.
I think we did not do a great job at messaging. I'm not trying to throw John under the bus here because he's sitting in the room with me, but I think players expected an event because we had done a zombie invasion before. And what we were really doing was giving players a preview of the scenarios that are coming in Mist of Pandaria. And Mist has several scenarios. This is just one of them. And there's a reason we started it fairly late. We didn't want players to run through the Theramore scenario for months because, honestly, there's not enough content there to keep players entertained for months. So it's really more of a preview of, coming attractions of this is what scenarios are like. It's a new feature. We knew not everyone understood exactly what it meant, and that's really a way for you to quickly do content. If you have, say, a lunch break, or you finished your dungeon and you just need a little more valor to kind of complete what you wanted to do that night, you can run a scenario, and in 15 or 20 minutes you can have some decent gear. I think the players that understand that are enjoying Theramore, and the ones that thought this was going to be the new Halion raid, or thought it was going to be the Scourge invasion that we had from the Lich King, were understandably disappointed, because that's not quite what we were going for.
So do you think the players that didn't like this preview of the scenario are going to are actually going to like real scenarios?
I mean, I can't put words in players' mouths, but they're convinced that this is just not the kind of content for them. But I will say that the developers enjoy running scenarios a lot. They feel really different from dungeons or group quests. You can coordinate with the other people, but there's not rigid coordination. There's no tanking or healing, for example. I mean, you can have a tank or a healer, but we don't design it around that trinity. So you use things like defensive cooldowns or self-healing or things like that normally you would just rely on the healer for. If there's no tank with you, then there's no concept of, oh, the mob is totally locked down and I'm safe. So when you're fighting a boss, there's it's a much more dynamic and fun in a different way. Boss encounters in dungeons or raids can almost feel very methodical, of like, okay, step one, we're going to do this, then step two, we're going to do this. It almost has a turn-based feel to it, whereas killing, say, the Sarok boss at the end of the Lightning Logger scenario is kind of unpredictable, as you're not exactly sure what's going to happen. I think that is a lot of fun. Players are looking for a super challenge. They're not going to find it in scenarios the same way you don't generally find it doing quests. Those players will probably enjoy something like our dungeon challenge modes a lot more.
All right, and so challenge modes is kind of like a time mode from what I've seen.
Exactly.
So are you going to only have that for dungeons, and could that progress out into other aspects of the game?
Potentially. I know there's been a lot of interest in applying that to raids. Raids are just very different. They're longer for starters. Part of the beauty of challenge modes is that when you nail a gold medal, you might be able to completing it in 15 or 20 minutes. Part of the fun is dealing with the trash, which historically players never took trash very seriously. But in the challenge modes, it's all about the trash and how you can overcome them quickly without wiping, because that really slows you down a lot. Even we don't do heroic trash and heroic raids, for example, so the trash ends up not being very challenging. But we'll see. If challenge modes are a wild success and they prove very popular, then I'm sure we'll consider it for raids.
We have time for one more question.
All right. I would ask you a moose question, but I don't think that would do the job. Why did you pick the name Ghostcrawler, and why did you pick the crab for your avatar?
Before I was a game designer, and I've been a game designer for 15 years now, but before that I was a marine biologist, and my specialty was crustaceans. So when the people at Blizzard said, hey, it's time to pick your forum avatar, I picked the little pygmy surf crawler that crawls around in the beaches at Durotar that one of my hunters tamed years and years ago. So. I think I even tried to pick the name Ghost Crab, but it was taken, so I went with Ghost Crawler instead, which kind of has a more WoW feel anyway.
It does. But Ghost Crab, it could have been a thing.
Yeah.
You want to plug your Twitter real quick? Because I know you're on Twitter now.
I am on Twitter, and a very nice person even reserved at Ghostcrawler for me, so it's pretty easy to find me.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me here on this interview.
No, I enjoyed it. It was great talking to you.
Yep. Have you ever seen any of my videos?
I have, in fact. I was wondering if all of these interview questions were going to be about videos.
I'm not that narcissistic. All right. Well, thanks for interviewing again, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, nice talking to you.